Hi, my name is Austin Merrill, and I've chosen to do my research paper and my presentation on Bernie Madoff and Ponzi fraud. We'll talk a little bit about the history of Ponzi fraud, and then we'll talk about the targets that Bernie Madoff had, what people he chose to invest with, and how he differentiated a little. And we'll talk about the regulating agencies who are supposed to investigate this type of fraud and prevent it. And then in conclusion, what we can do to avoid being a victim to this type of thing. Now, the first point I want to talk about is Ponzi. Carlos Ponzi was an Italian immigrant. And in about the 1920s, his biggest scheme that he devised was a stamp scheme. He bought stamps in Spain at a depressed value of currency and brought them to the U.S. and would sell them for the face value of U.S. dollars. It was a way that he felt like the exchange rate and currency had an exposed loophole that would benefit him greatly. So he convinced people he could get them a 50% return in just 45 days. They lined up for blocks and spent their money. Now he just paid the oldest investors with the newest investors' money. That was all he did, and that's how it became known as a Ponzi scheme. Now Bernie had done a similar thing, only his framework was, I'll just use a reasonable investment, but rather than get a quick return on your buck, I'll focus on people who are far more established and don't need their money as quick. And so his targets became well-to-do people, first of all, personal relationships and family and friends, and then became eventually charities and hedge funds because there was a lot of money in those markets. He told them he'd give them a 1% return on their investment every month, and rarely ever showed that he didn't even get that. It was a proprietary thing is what he would tell them. And so when they marketed the investing with Bernie Madoff, they marketed him as a sort of a proprietary investment concept as opposed to Bernie Madoff the individual. And they had to agree not to publish his name or market him as an individual. Now because of that, one of the individuals who reverse engineered Bernie Madoff's investments noticed that his name wasn't on the marketing materials and started to reverse engineer the returns and all the different investments, and he became convinced within just a few hours that there was some sort of fraud going. So he turned over this information once he determined it was either front running or Ponzi. He turned that over to the SEC, and he continued to just it was unrelentless. He just continued after, badgering them about how this is fraud, we need to investigate it, we need to do something. They eventually did investigate, but they just turned the investigation, they closed it, investigated him for front running or something to that nature, and found no wrongdoing. However, what really was the point when Bernie became so out of control and was beyond a point of no return was when he started using money from hedge funds and feeder funds and charities to help pay off some of the original. He had to grow this Ponzi into something bigger, and at that point billions of dollars had come in, and so he became one of the biggest managers of these funds, and nobody had even heard of him, which was what led Harry Markopolos down his path as well. It all came crashing down in 2008 when the market dropped to a 7-year low, and everybody wanted their money because the markets were at a 70-year low and they didn't know what to expect. But there was no money to be had. And an important point to note was that it wasn't a whistleblower or the SEC investigation that brought this fraud down. It was Bernie himself admitted he committed fraud. These types of things happen rarely, but when we try to reverse back into what went wrong, and we wonder who's to blame. Well, it was the hedge fund managers, charities, investors, Bernie, everybody. There was a lot of blame to go around to a lot of people. So we wonder, who can we trust? Well, we are supposed to trust those who are licensed and authorized to operate. We're supposed to trust the ratings, and we're supposed to trust that they'll act in good faith in our behalf. And our responsibility is to make sure we do our due diligence, making sure we're investing with good people. The funds we pick are reputable, and every now and then maybe have an independent person evaluate our investments and pay them to analyze it and to let us know that it's doing what we think and it's doing what we hoped for, or whether or not the fees are too high. It doesn't stop fraud, but it does minimize it. If just a few people would have found that Bernie Madoff wasn't registered or hadn't done some of the things, so much could have been stopped. And for us to simply just ignore that fraud exists and not do anything just because we've had good faith doesn't make it not happen. Fraud is going to exist whether or not we believe it to be.